Robert Kiyosaki is an investor, author, and entrepreneur who focuses on financial education. He is the author of the popular book, Rich Dad Poor Dad, which has inspired a new wave of entrepreneurs. And today, we're covering my take on Kiyosaki's top rules of money. If you like videos about business, money, and psychology, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell button to not miss any of our value-packed videos. And let's get started. Rule number 1. Know how to separate an asset from a liability. This is one of Kiyosaki's simplest yet most powerful rules, worthy of a mention. This states that the rich fully understand the difference between an asset and a liability. In simple terms, assets are those things that make you money. Liabilities are those things that make you lose money. The rich focus on building or buying assets and limiting liabilities, and only buying those liabilities if the assets can pay for them. Sounds simple, but this can quickly become more complicated depending on the person's financial goals. For example, someone buying a house, which takes money away from the owner's pocket in form of a down payment, a mortgage, insurance, and property taxes, all without producing any form of income. Kiyosaki would call this a liability. But this can become an asset if the owners, for example, use this property to live in for a few years while upgrading it and flipping it for a profit. If they pay the same amount in their mortgage payment that they would pay in rent, they are technically not in the negative. And if by the end they end up making a profit, then this house has become an asset. Something important to understand is that Kiyosaki, when determining what an asset and a liability is, his main focus is cash flow, or the amount of money this asset produces on a recurring basis. The reason why Kiyosaki does not consider a house to live in an asset is because it produces negative cash flow. In other words, it takes away a portion of your income in order to eventually own it, even if it can be sold for a higher price later in the future. According to Kiyosaki, rich people focus on developing assets that produce consistent cash flow over the person's lifetime, rather than assets that can be sold for a profit. Understanding cash flow is very important, which leads us to Kiyosaki's next rule of money. Rule number 2. Understand the different types of cash flow. Kiyosaki says that virtually all income, the way people make money, falls into 4 main categories. The 4 ways people make money are as an employee, self-employed, as a business, or as an investor. This is what he calls the cash flow quadrant, and each category has its own set of rules and mentalities. He says that many people start off producing income as an employee working for another company or the government. Although a great way to get started, Kiyosaki says that it is very difficult, if not impossible, to become wealthy in this category. This is where an employee exchanges time for money, but there is only 24 hours in a day, so there is always a limit on how much they can earn. There is a way that someone in this category can become wealthy, and that is by moving to the I quadrant, but we'll talk about that in a second. Kiyosaki also says that there's a particular mindset that is native to this category. He says that the majority of people in the E quadrant prioritize safety over income. People who decide to stay in this category choose the feeling of safety a paycheck provides over potential wealth, which inevitably comes with risk. In the S quadrant, we have the self-employed or small business owner. This category houses those who took the leap and became self-sustained, those who started their own business and began making money on their own. Now, in this quadrant, people typically still exchange time for a chance of profit. In this category, the entrepreneur is likely to work many more hours than the employee, but there's a bigger chance of higher earnings. And this is how many people get started. But the ultimate goal of an entrepreneur in this quadrant is to move out of this category into the big business category. Here is where we turn a business into an asset that produces cash flow. Here is where the small business entrepreneur takes the profits and invests them into hiring people to take care of labor or to build systems that automate functions. Here is where true scalability resides. The owner of the business is no longer the bottleneck of the business. The goal of this category is to have a business that no longer needs the owner in order to operate. The business can grow and generate income regardless of what the owner is doing with his time, turning this business into a true cash flow asset. The next quadrant is the investor category. Here's where people use money to produce more money. Now, Kiyosaki defines the investors in this category as those who have control and have negotiation power over the investment opportunity, or what he calls a sophisticated investor. Kiyosaki does not consider those who casually buy stocks, bonds, or ETFs as sophisticated investors, since they do not have control over the asset itself. But if a person buys and controls real estate to produce income, for example, Kiyosaki would put them in this category since the investor has control over the investment. The goal of this category is to turn money you already have, or as we'll talk later in the video, leverage debt to create cash-generating assets. People in all categories can take advantage of this quadrant to create wealth. Something that many wealthy people do is to have a business that generates consistent cash flow, and instead of spending it, they will take this money into the I quadrant to grow and multiply. Rule number 3, understand taxes. Taxes are the biggest expense for most people. But as we probably already know, some people pay more in taxes while others pay much less even when they make more. See, going back to the cash flow quadrant, Kiyosaki shows us that each one of these categories are taxed very differently from each other. An employee has very little control over how they are taxed, and it all depends on how much money they earn. People who make under $9,875 are in the 10% tax bracket, and those who make over $518,000 are over the 37% tax bracket for federal taxes. This is not including state taxes, which can take the total amount paid in taxes to over 40%. There are a few ways that employees can lower their tax bill by either deferring it to be paid later by investing in their retirement accounts or taking advantage of things like medical savings accounts or saving for college. Now, a self-employed person can actually pay more taxes than the average employee. Normally, when a person has a job, the employer pays half of the Medicare and Social Security tax. This means that employees pay 7.65% of their income to Medicare and Social Security tax, and employers pay the other 7.65%. But as a self-employed person or a small business owner, the entrepreneur would have to pay the full 15.3% tax because they are both the employer and the employee. There are a few benefits of owning a business though, and this is the ability to have tax deductions on expenses that are related to the business. For example, if a self-employed person has a home office, they can deduct part of their rent and utilities as a business expense. Now, bigger companies not only get deductions of business expenses, but they also get tax incentives provided by the government. Since big companies help create a better overall economy in the country, they are incentivized to do what the government wants them to do, like create jobs, provide affordable housing, or create advances in medicine, technology, and energy. Corporations have incredible tax incentives, like Amazon, for example. In 2018, Amazon legally paid no federal taxes from their $11.2 billion profit and actually got a $129 million tax rebate from the federal government. This was mainly due to the Tax Cut and Jobs Act of 2017 that took corporate taxes from 35% down to 21%. Amazon also carried over losses of previous years where they spent more than they made. They also took advantage of tax credits for research and development and stock-based employee compensation credits. Something that most people don't realize is that some of the wealthiest people in the world focus on building equity, not necessarily making cash. This can allow them to build their wealth tax-free. For example, the government gives incentives to those who provide affordable housing. So if you bought a property for $1 million and sold it for $3 million a few years later, you would normally pay 20% in capital gains tax, which is less than earned income. But if you use that money to buy a $3 million property, you would now own a bigger asset that produces more income without paying taxes for the $2 million profit, because you reinvested the money back into more housing. On top of that, investors can claim extra tax benefits such as depreciation, interest on mortgage, and property expenses, among others, which can lower the tax bill the investor pays from their property cash flow. Which leads us to our next point. Rule number 4, using debt to make money. Let's use the example from the last point. An investor, let's call him Tom, bought a property for $1 million in cash and sold it for $3 million a few years later. Instead of paying capital gains tax, he decided to reinvest his money into buying more property. He could buy a property in cash that costs $3 million, which brings around $250,000 per year in positive cash flow. Or he could put $3 million down on a $10 million property that brings $500,000 in positive cash flow every year. Tom would invest this $3 million and borrow $7 million from the bank. Kiyosaki explains that there are 2 types of debt. Debt that you have to pay yourself, in other words, bad debt, or debt that others pay for you, or good debt. Rich people tend to always use debt to leverage bigger assets and accelerate their wealth. Like in this example, Tom will leverage other people's money to own a bigger asset while creating a bigger monthly cash flow. and other people are paying down his debt, which increases his equity and total net worth tax-free. Rule number 5, learn to protect your assets. Something important Kiyosaki emphasizes is not only developing assets and building wealth, but protecting it. And one of the best ways to do this is to understand how to use business entities. When someone starts a business, this business automatically becomes a sole proprietorship. This means that all of your assets are unprotected to a claim. If someone tries to sue your business or you make a bad business decision, your personal assets are exposed, or vice versa. If you are sued or you make a financial mistake in your personal life, people can come after your business and your business's assets. Or if we start a business with someone else with no formal entity, this becomes a general partnership. This can become even more dangerous than a sole proprietorship because this has double liability. If your partner or even your partner's immediate family under his jurisdiction make a mistake, your business's assets and even your personal assets can be exposed to a claim. But of course, there are better ways of doing business. For example, setting up a limited liability company separates your personal assets from the business's assets. So if you make a financial mistake personally, people cannot come after your business or vice versa. If someone tries to come after your company, your personal assets are protected. This works similarly with a limited liability partnership where the business entity is separated from the owner's personal assets. Rule number 6, get rid of cash. Back in 1971, the United States and soon the rest of the world went from the gold standard, where money was backed by gold reserves, and was replaced with what is known as fiat money, not backed by any commodity. Money is now controlled by the central bank, and we have what is known as inflation. This is when money loses value every year. As more money is being created, the value of each individual dollar also decreases. This is one of the reasons why Kiyosaki recommends getting rid of cash that loses value and trade it for assets that generate cash flow while appreciating in value. And these were my top 6 ideas about money from author Robert Kiyosaki. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps us with the YouTube algorithm. In the comments below, let me know what topic you would like to learn next, and I will do what I do best. Research a complicated topic and make it as simple as possible. And as always, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.